The alien woman didn't know the human man was a mortal Earthling until she met him. The ship hummed like a content cat, except this cat had a warp drive and a tendency to explode if you looked at it wrong. Kora lounged upside down in her pilot chair, legs draped over the console, long silver hair brushing the floor. Her ears twitched as the data stream from Sector 381 finally gave up and died in a whimper of static. Another dead planet. Another hollow sphere of frozen gas pretending to be interesting. She sighed. "LK-1, she said, addressing the ship's AI. "Tell me something new before I drift into a boredom-induced dimensional fold." A voice, smooth as synthetic velvet and twice as smug, answered. "Did you know Earthlings once believed cats controlled the internet?" Kora blinked. "Explain what an internet is." A holoscreen flickered to life, displaying a flurry of images, mostly of kittens. One was playing a keyboard. Another appeared to be attacking a cucumber. Kora frowned. "This is a form of intelligence network?" "In a manner of speaking," L0K1 said, clearly enjoying this. "It's largely powered by caffeine and existential dread." "That explains nothing," she muttered, rubbing her temples. "Where did this transmission come from?" "From an unaligned blue planet on the outer rim of the Meridian Veil. Local name, Earth. The transmission is approximately 483 years old. Primitive, delightfully so." "Set course," she said, kicking off the console and flipping upright. "Let's see what caffeinated dread tastes like." The ship obeyed with a barely concealed groan, like a tired horse made of quantum alloys. Stars stretched, bent, and snapped as they entered the transit corridor. Kora flexed her fingers, feeling the familiar tingle of time dilating. She hadn't visited a Class 4 civilization in decades. Most of them ended up nuking themselves before she could finish her observational notes. The ship emerged from hyperspace with a belch. Kora blinked at the planet below, green and blue, dotted with puffy clouds like a polite fruit. A satellite orbited lazily nearby, patched together with duct tape and hope. A signal blinked from a gray rock just beyond the planet's reach. "Lunar station. Occupied," LK1 said. Kora leaned forward. "Only one life form?" "Affirmative. A lone human. Name, Jace Harlan. Age 34. Occupation, astrophysicist/vending machine maintenance specialist." "Those are combined?" "In this case, yes. Well, I suppose I should say hello." Kora stepped into the landing pod, a sleek craft shaped like a teardrop and twice as dramatic. The pod detached and drifted downward, cutting through the lunar silence like a whisper. Below, a squat building with peeling solar panels and a flag that had long since given up on physics came into view. A figure stood outside, adjusting what appeared to be a telescope held together with zip ties. The pod landed softly. Dust puffed up like it had something to say. The hatch hissed open. Kora descended with as much grace as someone adjusting to 1/6 gravity could manage. She stumbled slightly, then straightened, her long ears twitching. Jace turned, wearing a puffy jacket with a coffee stain shaped like Australia. He stared. "Oh," he said, blinking. "Wow, hello. Did NASA finally start sending actual aliens, or did I forget to update my medication again?" Kora stepped forward. "I am Kora of the Elysiari. I am here to study your planet's culture. Also, your memes." "Did you say memes?" "Yes. Your communications were intercepted. They were emotionally erratic and feline-oriented." Jace blinked. "Yeah, that sounds about right." They stood in silence for a moment. Then he pointed toward the building. "Want some coffee? It's instant and mildly disappointing, like most of my romantic history." Kora hesitated. "Is it a liquid?" "Barely." She followed him inside. The interior of the station was cluttered with wires, screens, snack wrappers, and a plant that looked like it had given up in the 90s. Jace poured coffee from a metallic thermos that might have once been part of a rocket. "So, he said, handing her a steaming cup. "You really from space?" "Yes. Like actual space. I did not crawl out of a crater wearing a tinfoil hat, if that's what you're asking." "Fair," he nodded, sipping. "You look surprisingly human." Kora's ears twitched. "I adapted my form to be familiar. Ears excluded. I like the ears. They're kind of elfin, in a good way, like you're about to tell me I'm the chosen one." "I'd rather not start with lies." Jace laughed, and she found herself oddly pleased. "So what brings a centuries-old space traveler to this dusty little moon?" he asked. "Curiosity, boredom, and your species' fascination with something called reality television. I came to see if it was real." Well, he said, gesturing to a screen playing a rerun of a cooking competition. That lady just made ice cream out of squid ink and regret, so yes, it's horrifyingly real. She watched in silence for a few moments, then muttered, I should have brought popcorn. They spent the next few hours discussing Earth customs. She was baffled by the concept of birthdays. He was fascinated by her descriptions of stellar jellyfish that communicated through synchronized hallucinations. At one point, he handed her a Twinkie, and she stared at it like it might explode. He assured her it probably wouldn't. So, Jace said finally, reclining in a beanbag chair with a content sigh, what happens now? You observe and report back to your people that humans are ridiculous but charming? Kora looked at him. His smile was crooked. There was coffee on his sleeve. His socks didn't match. I think, she said, I stay a little longer. He raised an eyebrow. For more research? Of course. Neither of them spoke after that. The moon was silent outside. The stars watched. Somewhere in her mind, Kora felt a shift, a subtle, imperceptible tug toward something she hadn't experienced in decades. Not intrigue, not study, wonder, and possibly indigestion. That Twinkie was suspicious. The moon had a peculiar way of making silence feel louder. Inside the station, the hum of old machinery formed a kind of lo-fi background track to a rapidly evolving odd couple sitcom that no one had greenlit. Kora was lying on her back, halfway under a generator with a screwdriver in one hand and a spoonful of peanut butter in the other. This is not a tool, she said flatly. Jace, standing above her, blinked. It's not? No, it is food. Your labels are misleading. I mean, it's technically both. Depends on how desperate you are. I am not desperate, merely confused. Jace squatted beside her and offered her an actual screwdriver. Here, maybe use this before the AI thinks we're regressing. K1, connected via her earpiece, spoke in his usual tone of synthetic exasperation. Too late? They had spent the last 3 Earth days attempting to reroute the lunar station's failing energy core through Kora's auxiliary power cells. The result was a Frankenstein circuit that occasionally hummed a low B-flat and smelled vaguely like burnt popcorn. Kora crawled out and wiped moon dust off her tunic. Your energy systems are chaotic, Jace nodded. Thanks. I built part of it during a breakup. That explains the explosive redundancy. He looked genuinely impressed. You got all that from the wiring? No, from the playlist you left on loop. I didn't know someone could listen to Toxic by Britney Spears 42 times in a row. It's part of my healing process. She tilted her head. Is this what humans do when they suffer loss? Loop emotionally destabilizing sound waves? Yup, and sometimes we cut our hair, or eat a lot of cheese. She blinked slowly. This explains many things about your species. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Mornings began with Jace attempting to cook, which usually ended with the fire extinguisher sighing in resignation. Afternoons were filled with experiments, mostly involving Kora scanning seemingly mundane objects and declaring them mildly interesting but probably not sentient. Evenings were dedicated to Earth cinema, which Kora absorbed like a sponge. After Back to the Future, she spent 30 minutes trying to locate a real flux capacitor. After Titanic, she demanded to know why they didn't both just float on the door. After Men in Black, she stared at Jace for a full minute and said, Your government is deeply unqualified. One night, as the Earth hung like a glowing coin in the sky above the lunar dome, Kora set up her personal interface orb, a floating sphere that displayed holograms of her collected data. Jace wandered in, still munching a granola bar. Whoa, he said, watching 3-dimensional constellations swirl above them. I have charted over 10,000 systems, she said. I have walked beneath emerald suns. I have conversed with organisms that speak in harmonics and taste color, but your species remains deeply unpredictable. I'll take that as a compliment, he said, sitting beside her. She looked at him, really looked. His hair was a mess. There was a streak of grease across his cheek. His socks still didn't match. But there was something in his eyes, curiosity, resilience. That irritating twinkle of humor even when the air recycler sputtered and they had to share an oxygen mask for 2 hours. Why are you here alone? She asked suddenly. He blinked. On the moon? Yes, Jace shrugged. Wanted space, in both senses. Earth got noisy. People stopped looking up. I figured someone had to. Kora nodded slowly. You chose solitude? I chose clarity. Though honestly, I didn't expect alien company. she smirked. Neither did I. The orb rotated, displaying a simulation of the Varellan collapse, a supernova she had witnessed 117 years ago. Jace watched in awe as the digital sun expanded and tore itself apart. "How long do your people live?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer immediately. "We don't measure life that way." He turned to her. "You're avoiding the question." She hesitated. "Millennia. Sometimes longer." Jace gave a low whistle. "So I'm basically a fruit fly to you." "A charming fruit fly," he laughed. "Well, that's going on my resume." They sat in silence for a while, the holographic explosion bathing them in flickering starlight. Then Jace reached out casually, and their fingers brushed. To Kora, it felt like an electrical pulse. Not painful, but sharp. She pulled back slightly, startled. He noticed. "You okay?" She nodded, distracted. "You emit an unusual pattern." "Thanks, I think." She stood abruptly. "I need to recalibrate my translator matrix." "Or you could admit you like me." She paused. "Unlikely. Statistically, I'm very hard to impress. Statistically, I once fixed a solar panel using chewing gum and a spoon. That's not... Never..." She walked off, leaving Jace grinning like someone who had just won an argument without understanding how. Back in her ship, Kora accessed her biosensory logs. She replayed the moment their skin touched. There it was, his energy signature, erratic, warm, finite. She frowned. "LK1, she said. "Confirm the lifespan of humans." The AI responded instantly. "Approximately 70 to 100 Earth years, less if they ignore warning labels." Kora stared at the projection of Jace's biofield, his pulse, his neural patterns, the inevitable decline already encoded in his cells. "He's dying," she said softly. "All organic life dies," L0K1 replied. "Yours does not. That's the difference." She didn't reply. Instead, she sat alone, watching the digital ghost of a dying star, and for the first time in centuries felt something entirely unfamiliar rise inside her. Fear. Jace was humming what he insisted was an ancient Earth battle hymn called "Never Gonna Give You Up," while trying to install a replacement sensor panel using a wrench, duct tape, and a very misplaced sense of optimism. Kora stood nearby, arms crossed, watching him with the precise expression of someone witnessing an interstellar disaster unfold in slow motion. "That is not going to work," she said. "It's a technique passed down from generations of scientists who had no budget and too much free time," he replied, taping the panel with a final slap. "Behold, human ingenuity." The panel immediately sparked, groaned, and fell off. Kora raised an eyebrow. "Impressive. It failed faster than I predicted." "That's efficiency," Ed proudly, brushing ash off his jacket. "Anyway, you're the one who said your people observe other species for cultural development. Consider this performance art." "Performance implies intention." "Exactly." They moved inside before the station's oxygen filters could start wheezing again. Kora had developed a growing habit of poking around in Earth objects, often with complete disregard for what they were or how fragile they might be. Today she was holding up a banana. "This is not a communicative device, correct?" "No, it's a fruit." "Why is it shaped like a commline receiver?" "We like things that are familiar." "Also potassium. Please don't." Conversations like that had become normal. Kora was still adjusting to the fragility of Earth life, not just the biology, but the emotional plumbing that seemed to leak constantly. Jace cried once while watching a cartoon dog wait for its owner. She hadn't known what to do, so she handed him a wrench. That helped less than expected. They had started building a routine, not because they needed to, but because the idea of ritual fascinated Kora. Mornings began with tea and awkward silence until caffeine activated Jace's brain. Afternoons were full of tinkering and failed experiments, like the time Jace tried to make ice cream using lunar nitrogen and ended up flash freezing his own eyebrows. Evenings were for data logs and debates over whether Earth's moon really needed a flag on it, considering no one cleaned it. But Kora couldn't shake what she'd learned. The knowledge clung to her mind like static. Jace was mortal. It wasn't just a fact, it was a countdown. A truth with a deadline. He didn't know she knew, and she didn't know how to tell him. It didn't help that Jace kept being, well, Jace. He was currently constructing what he called a makeshift gravity hammock, using old antennae and what appeared to be space-grade underwear elastic. "I have calculated 6 ways this can fail," Kora said, observing him from the control terminal. 6? Pfft, that's low. I'm going for double digits." The hammock snapped and launched him gently into a wall. He lay there a moment, groaning. Ow! Science is pain. You are made of soft tissue and reckless choices, and yet I'm still the most functional human on this rock. Kora stood over him. The bar is extremely low. He grinned up at her. Good thing I'm flexible. She helped him up. Their hands touched again, briefly. She felt it, that same surge. Not electricity, not telepathy, just warmth, fleeting, alive. That night, while Jace slept, snoring softly with a blanket featured cartoon rockets and the words, "Shoot for the stars, miss frequently," Kora activated a secure channel to her ship. "LOK-1, she whispered, sitting in the dark. The AI's voice came through immediately. "You're being dramatic, I like it. Access interspecies ethical protocols," she said. "You're being dramatic and responsible. I'm conflicted. Is there precedent for an Elysiari-forming attachment to a time-limited organism?" There was a pause. "There are 7 recorded instances. 4 ended in catastrophic emotional disassembly. 2 resulted in interplanetary poetry contests. 1 just turned into a cult." Kora sighed. "So it's unwise." "Oh, undoubtedly, but fascinating." She deactivated the link and stared out the window. Earth hung in the sky like a secret. Below it, Jace stirred and mumbled something about flying sandwiches. She didn't sleep that night. The next day, she proposed a field trip. "To Earth?" he asked, brushing his teeth with one hand and trying to find his shoes with the other. "Bit of a jump, don't you think?" "There is an unregistered launch corridor above the Pacific. I can land the ship within 20 meters of a vending machine." "You know how to win a guy's heart." They took off in the Skyrake the next morning. Jace was visibly impressed by the interior. Luminescent walls, floating control glyphs, gravity that shifted like mood lighting. He tried to touch everything until Kora gently swatted his hand. "Stop pressing things. One of those vents sends you to a pocket dimension full of sentient moss." "That's oddly specific. It's also oddly judgmental." They landed in a remote corner of Earth, deep in a rainforest with bioluminescent frogs and Wi-Fi better than most apartments. Kora watched Jace walk barefoot through the underbrush, staring up at the stars from a new angle. "It's weird," he said. "Looking up from Earth after looking down from space. Feels like I'm standing on the inside of a snow globe." Kora didn't answer. She was busy scanning the sky as if hoping it might give her a sign. They sat by a small fire that evening, cooking marshmallows over a plasma coil because Jace refused to go full survivalist. He looked at her across the flame. "You've been quiet? I am processing. You're always processing, but you're also worried." She didn't deny it. He reached over gently, taking her hand. "You don't have to explain. I get it. You're not from here, and I'm not going to be here forever." Her eyes met his. For a moment, neither of them breathed. "You knew?" she whispered. He shrugged. "I may not be a centuries-old alien, but I'm not an idiot. I know what the clock looks like." "Then why do you still do this? Joke? Laugh? Build unstable hammocks? Because if you're going to fall, might as well enjoy the view on the way down." Kora didn't respond. Not with words. Instead, she leaned her head against his shoulder, quietly, as the fire crackled and the frogs sang like they had opinions. They stayed there until the stars faded into morning, and neither of them said goodbye. Jace was standing on the roof of the lunar station again, which technically wasn't a roof so much as a heat-scorched panel balanced on optimism. He was holding a long stick with an antenna taped to the end, waving it at the sky like a ceremonial rain dance for better Wi-Fi. "I think if I pointed at Alpha Centauri and do a little wiggle, you will fall and embarrass your species," Kora said from below. "That's a risk I'm willing to take." "You said that right before your sock caught fire." "That was different. That was experimental footwear." Kora sighed and tapped her communicator. "LOK-1, please disable his access to makeshift engineering mode." "Done," said the AI, "though I can't stop him from being a walking hazard." Jace hopped down, looking pleased with himself despite accomplishing nothing. "I think I'm onto something. Maybe if I reroute the station's uplink through your ship's nav core, you will start a quantum loop and age 6 months in 2 seconds. He paused. "Would I still get to keep my hair? No? Then never mind." It had been weeks since their field trip to Earth, since the quiet night under a moss-laced sky, since they'd acknowledged the unsaid thing between them, acknowledged it, and then promptly avoided it like a sensitive file labeled "Do Not Open," too many feels. They continued with their odd routines. Kora resumed her cataloging of Earth's cultural exports, which now included toaster pastries, inflatable furniture, and a song called Baby Shark that she claimed was an encoded war chant. Jace became increasingly curious about her technology, often to the dismay of LK1, who had started referring to him as the entropy unit. But even as the humor stitched itself into each day, something heavier hung in the air, like a storm lurking on the horizon of their little lunar world. One evening, Kora received a transmission. It came encrypted, buried in an old diplomatic handshake protocol, the kind Elysiari emissaries used when they didn't want to be overheard by the usual bureaucratic snoops. She took the call alone inside the Skyrake, while Jace attempted to grill space cabbage using a solar collector. The hologram flared to life. A tall figure with opalescent skin and ceremonial robes raised a slender hand. "Kora of Elysiar, you have been summoned." She stiffened. "Reason?" "Unorthodox contact. You are developing a cross-species bond outside the recommended observational parameters." "I'm not interfering." "You are becoming affected." There was a pause. Kora chose her words carefully. "That is not prohibited. It is discouraged." She didn't respond. The figure continued, "Return to the core. There will be a hearing." The transmission ended before she could reply. L0K1 spoke from the shadows. "You knew this was coming." "I did." "Are you going to tell him?" Kora's silence said everything. Later, as Jace handed her a very unevenly grilled vegetable skewer, he noticed the look in her eyes. "Did someone call?" "Yes." "From your place?" "My place? Your space home. Your fancy council of long-eared immortals. That place." Kora stared at the skewer. "They want me to return. For how long?" "Unclear." Jace took a slow bite. "You're gonna go, aren't you?" "I don't have much choice." He nodded, then smiled. "Well, guess I'll have to finish installing that hammock myself." "You'll break your neck. Then you'll have to come back and fix it." She smiled, but it was thin and didn't reach her eyes. 2 days later, the Skyrake prepared for departure. Kora stood in her pilot chamber, hand resting on the interface crystal. Jace stood beside her, arms crossed, looking at the console like it had personally insulted his cooking. "So that's it?" he asked. "You go back, have a tribunal or whatever, and I stay here and try not to burn the place down?" "You could come with me." He blinked. "Seriously? I can configure the biopod to support your physiology. It's only a few hundred light years. And what do I do once we get there? Impress your council with my vast collection of socks? Offer them a tuna melt?" "They might appreciate the socks." He laughed, then sobered. "I don't belong there, Kora. You don't belong here either. I know, but at least here I'm not constantly reminded that I'm temporary." Silence settled between them like dust. Finally, he said, "Go. Face your council. Tell them you made contact with a stubborn human who refuses to stop joking even in the face of galactic protocol." "I'll return," she said. "You better. I'm holding your screwdriver hostage." She stepped onto the lift pad. It rose silently. Jace watched her vanish through the ceiling of the hangar. "Come back soon," he whispered, "before my socks achieve sentience." The journey to the Elysiari core was swift, almost insultingly smooth. Kora stood before the High Council, flanked by crystalline architecture and glowing threads of knowledge suspended in air. The council speaker regarded her with detached serenity. "You allowed yourself to be moved." "Yes." "You consider him important." "I do." "You are aware of the consequences?" "I am." "And yet you did not sever the connection." "I did not." There was a pause. The speaker tilted their head. "We will not stop you, but we will not shield you." Kora bowed her head. "You have chosen attachment. Prepare for loss." Later, alone in her chamber, she held the Earth artifact Jace had left her, a tiny plastic figurine of a raccoon wearing a cape. On its base were the words, "Trash, but make it fashion." She smiled, then set course for home. When she landed back on the moon, she found Jace fast asleep in the half-constructed gravity hammock. It had not collapsed. Yet. Jace was upside down when Kora returned, suspended in a hammock that had mysteriously not only survived but somehow evolved into a semi-functional piece of furniture. He had added cup holders. One of them contained a slightly stale cookie. She stood at the threshold of the lunar station's airlock, arms crossed, watching him gently spin like a confused satellite. "You're back," he said, blinking at her from his inverted state. "Either that or I passed out and this is one of those vivid oxygen deprivation dreams again." "I'm back." He flailed once and then dropped out of the hammock with a thud, stood up with a dramatic groan, and saluted. "Report, Commander. Did the Elders banish you to a dimension of eternal ennui?" "No, but they strongly considered it. And they let you return?" "I may have used emotional manipulation and one PowerPoint presentation involving a raccoon figurine and your attempt to use peanut butter as thermal paste." He blinked. "Wait, you brought up the peanut butter incident in front of your ancient wise council?" "They found it compelling." "Well," he said, dusting off his pants, "glad I could be helpful." They settled back into rhythm, but something was different now. There was no more pretending, no more strategic evasion of difficult conversations. Kora no longer kept her distance, and Jace had stopped making sarcastic jokes to dodge the fact that being human meant being temporary. They'd both accepted the clock, slow, ticking, insistent. One afternoon, Jace handed her a small, battered notebook with a sheepish look. "I've been writing," he said. "Don't get too excited. It's mostly diagrams and bad metaphors." Kora flipped through it, eyes scanning sketches of her ship, lyrical attempts to describe her eyes, like starlight that's learned sarcasm, and a rough draft of a sci-fi novel starring a raccoon diplomat. "You've captured my essence disturbingly well. Thanks, I think." "And this," she said, holding up a page with detailed blueprints. "Is this a fusion-powered coffee maker? I figured if we're going to stare mortality in the face, we should do it caffeinated. Practical." As the months passed, Kora did something unprecedented in Elysiari history. She filed a planetary residency request. It confused the archivists and delighted the one board clerk responsible for low-gravity lifestyle registrations. The paperwork had a checkbox for reason for stay, which she checked as romantic entanglement with unpredictable species. L0-K1 protested. "You are aware this voids your temporal stasis access." "I am, and you'll age, yes, and possibly develop an emotional fondness for early 2000s sitcoms. I already have. Then I have nothing left to say." Kora and Jace began modifying the Skyrake, converting sections into labs, quarters, and what Jace called a mobile disaster unit. He painted one panel with cartoon stars and a small doodle of a llama. Kora didn't erase it. They traveled, but not far. Earth's orbit became their playground. They docked with forgotten satellites, played chess inside weightless domes, danced to Earth jazz while floating above auroras. Kora kept collecting data, though her notes became less clinical and more poetic. Jace teased her about it constantly. One day they hovered above the Pacific, watching the curve of Earth shimmer. "I think," Jace said, arms behind his head, "I finally understand why you travel." She glanced over. "Oh, it's not about finding new things, it's about being changed by them." She smiled. "You sound like one of my old professors. He once argued that true discovery is measured in emotional displacement." "Did he also fall out of hammocks?" "Regularly." Jace's health began to decline slowly. At first, it was jokes about back pain and forgetting where he put his anti-grav slippers. Then it became real. Pauses between words, the slight tremble in his hands, the labored breath after laughter. Kora never said anything. She just stayed closer. He never asked her to fix him, and she never offered. Instead, they made a list of ridiculous things to do before time did what it always did. Create an artificial gravity field and play zero-G bowling. Check. Leave a secret message etched into the Martian soil using reflective paint. Check. Broadcast a karaoke version of Bohemian Rhapsody from the lunar station's outdated comm dish. Definitely check. Adopt a bioluminescent worm from a derelict research pod and name it Gary. Absolutely. Build a working model of the solar system powered by piezoelectric sneakers. Tragically, yes. One night, lying in a hammock strung between two structural beams, Jace turned to her. "You scared?" "No. A little." "Good, me too." She held his hand, warm but fading. "I'm not afraid of dying," he said. "I'm afraid of not having lived enough. You have lived more than most stars shine. Flattering and astronomically inaccurate. You would argue science on your deathbed. It's how I flirt." He closed his eyes. She stayed beside him, humming softly, an old Elysiari melody, once sung to calm the tides of oceans with no names. When he passed, it was quiet. No drama. Just a final breath and a peaceful stillness. Kora remained still for a long time. Then she stood, activated the ship's log, and began recording. "This is Kora of Elysiar, observer, traveler, witness. Today I mark the passing of Jace Harlan, Scientist, poet, engineer of broken things, and breaker of immortal assumptions. He taught me that time is not the enemy. It is the proof, the echo, the frame around the art. He was brief, but he mattered. She archived the message, and then, with deliberate motion, she initiated the lifelink severance protocol. It removed the last quantum tether to her Elysiari ancestry. She was mortal now. Years passed. The moon station became a sanctuary for lost transmissions and wandering signals. Kora turned it into a repository, a place for stray data and forgotten songs. She added a plaque outside the main hatch. Here lived a man who loved recklessly and installed hammocks poorly. Children of future colonies grew up hearing the story of the long-eared woman who fell in love with a man who knew he would die. She never sought another partner, but she smiled more. And somewhere, in the ship's private archive, sat a dusty notebook filled with bad poetry and excellent diagrams, and a figurine of a raccoon wearing a cape. Trash. But make it fashion. The end.